I know one of the big fears parents have is if I teach them too early, I'll take away their innocence. Here's what I want to say right now. Kids are already getting an education. It does not matter how carefully you shelter your children at home. If they're around other kids, if they're around the media, if they're driving past billboards, they're getting an education. And if you're not giving them the clinical truth, they will fill in those gaps with whatever they find. I want to tell you about a situation I saw over and over again, because it's one of the clearest examples of what happens when people don't have the clinical truth about their own bodies. A teenage boy starts having pain on one side. Not a, that's weird kind of pain, but like an alarm pain. And the first thing that happens in his brain is not, I should tell a parent, I should tell a doctor. The first thing that happens is, what did I do to cause this? Because he's heard all the myths. He's heard all the nonsense. He's heard all of the, if you do X, then Y will happen to your body. All that stuff that kids trade at school like it's facts. Or maybe an adult told him to try to keep him from doing things. And then, because he thinks he caused it, and because we've raised a whole generation of boys to feel ashamed of anything down there that isn't perfectly perfect, he doesn't say anything. He tries to wait it out. And that waiting is not harmless, because there's something called torsion. I'm not going to get graphic here, but torsion can be a surgical emergency. It's one of those things where time matters. So eventually the pain gets bad enough that he finally tells a parent. And now it's not a, let's call the doctor. It's a, we need to go in right now. They end up getting an ultrasound. They go through the whole emergency process. And in this particular case, thank heavens, it turns out not to be torsion. It's inflammation. Still painful, still needs treatment, still needs medical care. But do you see what happened? A problem that could have been handled earlier, more calmly, more clearly, turned into a panic and fear and urgent medical workups because the kid didn't have two things: accurate information and language. And this is what I mean when I say that sex ed isn't some sort of awkward education. It's safety education. It's health literacy. And it's not just boys, it's everybody. In this video, I want to explain why most adults never actually learned sex ed in a way that was useful, and why that knowledge gap creates shame, confusion, and sometimes real harm. And I want to show you what changes when we stop teaching mythology and start teaching clinical truth. So here's the myth I think most adults are walking around with, whether they realize it or not. A lot of adults believe that if you learned the basic mechanics, tab A goes into slot B, then you learned everything you need to know. And the problem is, even that framing is off. First of all, tab A and slot B are not matching parts the way people talk about them. For people with a slot B, that's merely a receptacle, not the matching part to tab A. And when you teach it that way, you're teaching people with that anatomy to see themselves as a receptacle, not as an active participant, not as a full person with intricate, meaningful, powerful anatomy. And here's what I mean by that. If you think about simple underwater creatures, they have one opening. Food goes in, everything goes out. Then you get more complicated creatures with two openings. Things come in one end and go out the other. And then you get creatures like men who have three: food in, waste out, and a separate exit for liquids. But women have four openings: food in, waste out, liquid out, and a separate opening for babies. That is so complicated and remarkable an arrangement. And most women have no idea how cool their bodies actually are. Well, you don't know that. You don't know what's normal. You don't know what to watch for. You don't know what to talk about. You don't know what symptoms to worry about. You don't know how to get help when you need it. You carry shame about parts of your body that you've never even been taught to name. If you're thinking like, okay, surely, but people know the basics. Let me give you two numbers that should stop all of us in our tracks. In research, only 9% of adults can correctly label all the parts of a vulva, and only 46% can name the three openings in female anatomy. That is not a personal failing. That is a systems failure. That is what happens when we teach sex ed like it's a one-time awkward unit in middle school with a little refresher in high school, instead of a lifelong foundation for health, safety, and relationships. Now, a quick note on language before we go any further. I'm going to use everyday words like women and men, and I'm talking about anatomy, and bodies and identities don't always match that perfectly. This information is just for anyone who needs it, however you identify. So let me take you into one of the places where I saw this knowledge gap constantly: routine exams. I was terrified of my first well-woman exam, and like many women, I've had some pretty bad experiences. A lot of awkwardness, a lot of rushing, a lot of just tolerating it. And then I got to medical school and I learned how to do well-woman exams. It's kind of a strange process because there's a standardized patient, an actual human person who trains you on her own body. And what I watched was this. Most students were very awkward. Most students were very rushed, and most students wanted to get in and out as quickly as possible. And I thought, no, this is my one chance to learn to do this really well. So I asked her tons of questions. What's more comfortable? How can I help patients with positioning? How do I support someone who's had a trauma history? And what do I do if the cervix is pointing in a funny direction? And what do I do when someone is tensing without meaning to? What words make things worse? What words help? And she answered every question. And everyone in the room, they learned from that too, because they were all listening while I was asking the things that no one else was wanting to ask. And I took that information and I ran with it. As I went through rotations, residency, my own clinical work, I did the same thing everywhere. Whenever I saw someone who was really good at something, I asked how they did it. Not for any old reason, but because I didn't want people to just get through healthcare. I wanted them to be able to use it, to trust it, and to feel safe. And when I built my own private practice, I designed it around that idea. Reduce shame, increase understanding, make the body visible and normal. I had a very specific exam table arrangement with a curtain so patients weren't exposed to the whole room. I had these huge drapes, my mom's old tablecloths that she'd sewn out of calico fabric, covered with flowers and rabbits and different fun things. I had hot air balloons hanging from the ceiling for people to look at. I had my specula stored in a drawer with a heater so they were always warm. But the most important thing I had was a very large hand mirror, a mirror that patients could use to watch what I was doing if they wanted to. And what I discovered was that the hand mirror was an incredibly important tool for one very simple reason. So many women had never actually looked at themselves before. They had no idea what was down there. They called it down there, or some euphemism. Not because they were stupid, but because no one had taught them beyond a quick little memorize the words, fill in a diagram, let's not talk about that again. And when someone doesn't have the language for their own body, they can't advocate for themselves. They can't explain their symptoms. They can't say, it hurts here, or they can't say this is changing. They can't say this doesn't seem right. So I started taking the time to show women their own anatomy, to explain what was normal, what to watch for, what was a variation, what was a red flag. I also had an educational anatomy book with photographs of different vulvas, and I would show them how every vulva is different, because most women have, of course, never seen another woman's vulva, so they have no point of comparison. And so many of them quietly believed that there was something wrong with theirs, and there wasn't. They're all unique. Each one is different. And spending that time showing what real and normal is, that changed everything. It changed the exam experience. It changed the shame. It changed self-understanding. And it mattered clinically, because when people don't look at their own bodies and don't understand what they're seeing, conditions get missed. Let me give you 3 examples of how this shows up in real life. First, painful exams that become traumatic, and then people avoid care. When someone has painful exams, it's not just unpleasant. When it becomes traumatic, people avoid going to the doctor. They avoid the exams they need, and they avoid bringing up symptoms, and then things get missed. Second, relationships. Relationships become painful or mismatched because nobody knows the map. Nobody knows what's going on. When people don't understand their anatomy, relationships can become very uncomfortable, less pleasurable, sometimes actively painful. And it creates a mismatch. One person might have a relatively easy time figuring out what feels good, and the other person is completely lost, and sometimes both people are lost. And we send people into something that is actually fairly complicated with less preparation than we give them to drive a car, which by comparison is pretty straightforward. Third, treatable conditions get missed because people don't know what's normal. For example, there's a condition called lichen sclerosus. It's an autoimmune condition of the vulva. And I caught so many cases that had been completely missed and been left way too long because women didn't ever look at their own bodies and didn't understand their anatomy and didn't know that what was uncomfortable was something that needed help. And so they never actually knew what was wrong until it was really far gone. Catching it early can prevent significant problems. And it's not only women. I had men who had pain, discomfort, aiming problems, changes, and they were too embarrassed to tell anyone. They didn't have the language, and they didn't think it was okay to talk about. Some of them thought that whatever was happening, they'd caused themselves because of all the myths boys get told. But once we started talking freely about anatomy, like it was just anatomy, they could finally say what was going on, and then we could help them. This isn't about knowing fun facts. This is about having a complete map of your own body. And if you're a parent, this matters even more, because if you don't have the map, you can't hand it to your kids. Parents should be the primary source of information for their kids and teens, not other kids at school, not YouTube, not TikTok, not whatever they Google at 11 p.m., and honestly, not even teachers. Not because teachers don't care, but because teachers have a lot of other things to do. And sex ed is often rushed. It's often taught quickly by a gym teacher or a health teacher, not a science teacher. But when it is taught as science, it's taught completely wrong. It doesn't cover what they actually need clinically. It's taught completely separately from what people actually live. It's taught like memorization, not real life. So your kids are out there piecing together this body map from a worksheet, a rumor, a joke, a meme, a terrified adult, and a search bar. Your kids are going to hear things from friends, from the news, from school, from the internet, and they need someone who can help them sort out what is propaganda, what is a talking point with an agenda, what is leaving out important information, and what is actual truth. And here's something I think parents don't realize. To kids, this stuff is not adult topics. It's only creepy or gross or weird if we make it that way. If you treat the body like any other part of the body, it becomes normal. My teenage son, I asked him, so you grew up with me. You've been living, this whole thing with me. What would you say it does for you? And he said, Mom, you took all the fun out of it. Because when you know the truth, it's not secret. It's not forbidden fruit. It's not gossip material. It's just another part of being a human being, another part of the body to understand and care for. And that's protective because secrecy is where manipulation thrives. When kids don't have language, someone else can control the story. When kids don't know what's normal, someone else can say that's normal or that doesn't count or don't tell anyone. And kids being kids can believe people. So parents need to change their mindset. A lot of people think their job is to protect their children from information, but that's just not realistic. Your job is not to protect them from information. Your job is to protect them from misinformation. And the way you do that is not by silence. It's by inoculating them with good information. You stay ahead of the nonsense. You teach what is clinically true, and you make yourself a safe place for questions. That doesn't mean sitting a 7-year-old down for an awkward talk. It means normalizing the body early, teaching accurate names, teaching that the body is not shameful, teaching that questions are welcome, teaching that health concerns go to a trusted adult, teaching that consent and boundaries have words. You don't just teach a child where their nose is and where their fingers are. You teach the whole body because the whole body belongs to them. And when you do that from the very beginning, you can have a teenager who comes to you and says, hey, someone said this. Hey, I'm worried about this. Hey, I don't think this feels right. And you can talk calmly, clinically, without shame. I know one of the big fears parents have is if I teach them too early, I'll take away their innocence. And we'll talk about that directly in another video. But here's what I want to say right now. Kids are already getting an education. It does not matter how carefully you shelter your children at home. If they're around other kids, if they're around the media, if they're around our culture, if they're driving past billboards, they're getting an education. And they're making inferences. And if you're not giving them the clinical truth, they will fill in those gaps with whatever they find. So you need to stay ahead of that. You teach biology first, and you treat it like what it is, a normal part of being a human. This is why I built Making More Humans. Making More Humans is a comprehensive human reproduction curriculum that covers the whole story, from embryology to pregnancy to conception to puberty to periods, all the way to menopause. So kids grow up understanding their bodies for life. And it's designed to give families something even more important than information, language, a shared vocabulary at home. So I can start the conversation, but you can keep it going. And it's built for real family life. Some families will watch it together. Some parents will watch it first and then again with their kids. Some teens will do better watching on their own first, especially if they've already learned that this is embarrassing in front of their parents, and then talking about it afterwards. And there's a private podcast version, so parents can listen ahead of time privately in their podcast player, because watching videos privately ahead of time is hard when life is busy, but listening with earbuds while you're folding laundry or driving or doing the dishes, that's doable. I'm a mom. I planned it for you that way. So you can preview what's coming, feel prepared, and decide how far you want to go with your kids right now, based on their curiosity and their readiness. And this is not a subscription. It's a one-time purchase with lifetime access, which matters because nobody learns something once and then has everything they need forever. You have to come back to it. You revisit it. You use it when your kid comes home and says, they said this at school, or someone said this at youth group, or I saw this thing online, or there was this thing on the news. And instead of it becoming, here's what I believe versus what they believe, you can pull out the relevant lesson and ask, what is clinically true here? What is the biology? What is the evidence? What is the fact? Because this is not a belief system. It's science. And teaching clinical truth helps kids identify pseudoscience and misinformation because they have a foundation of truth to stand on. The program includes guided notes for kids and teens, a glossary, and parent and teacher resources, including an answer key. The guided notes are built in 3 levels depending on what your goal is today. Level 1 is identify, the what, naming things and finding them. If you can name it, you can understand it. Level 2 is interpret, the how, understanding the process, how parts work together and why biological things happen. Level 3 is integrate, the why it matters, connecting the lesson to real life, rights, boundaries, and how we treat other people. We also include a bunch of really lovely diagrams, illustrations, charts, checklists, things that your kids will need as they go through different life stages. This is what adults should have gotten, and this is what our kids deserve right now. If you take nothing else from this video, take this. Most adults did not fail sex ed. They were never actually taught it. They were given scraps, jokes, fear, memorization, and then sent into life, into healthcare, relationships, puberty, pregnancy, aging, without any sort of map. Clinical truth is the map, and it's not shameful. It's not creepy. It's not gross. It's just the truth of being human. If you want to learn and teach in a way that's clinically accurate and shame-free, go to docrobinschool.com/truth. I'll see you next time. Take good care.